How's it going, everybody? Thanks again for tuning in. So today we've got another really good one. This is something that I obviously really enjoy personally, being a bit of a gearhead myself. As you can see, a couple of my personal reels on the table here. I obviously really enjoy gear and things like that. So this episode today is going to be purely about choosing the right fly reel. So we're going to cover everything from the smallest to the biggest. I'm not really going to focus too much on the freshwater side of things. This is mostly going to be orientated around if you're a saltwater fly fisherman, or you're looking at traveling to a saltwater destination, or any sort of more strenuous freshwater environment. So a lot of these reels can be used in double-handed scenarios, and also in the jungle if you're fishing for peacock bass or golden dorado or whatever it is. A lot of this stuff will cater, touch all those bases, but predominantly we'll cover some, good, solid bone fishing style stuff. Obviously good things for permit, and then we'll move up to the bigger things, GTs, top, and all the rest of that. If you have never bought a fly reel before, if this is the first time, you're sort of getting into the sport, please stay, watch through. I'll cover everything from seal drag to cork drag to just everything, handles, and all the rest of that. So. Yeah, guys, let's see what we can. Let's see if we can cover the reel nicely here and see what we can get you guys. So a few months ago, for those of you, almost about a year ago now, for those of you that follow me on Instagram and stuff, you would have seen that Cullen and myself did a video, talking about reels for fishing in the Seychelles. If you were coming out to fish up there, and we spoke about a lot of things with 12-weight reels, about line capacity and things to consider about fishing for GTs and stuff. So if you're interested in that, I'll leave sort of link below. Have a look at that video. If you are heading out to the Seychelles or something like that, or a fishery very similar to that, there'll be a lot of good information there about that. But what I'm going to do in this particular video is just cover the basics, start from the beginning and work our way up. That environment, if any of you guys have been there before, you'll understand. If you haven't, or I'm sure you've seen the videos and stuff, but that particular environment is probably one of the most demanding saltwater environments in the world. The amount of pressure and it's not really about the fish. It's more just how you're fishing for the fish out there. The gear goes through, just an absolute beating. So there are a lot of things we take into consideration when we suggest, particular products or brands or whatever it is, or particular styles of reels and rods as well, which we'll touch base on in another video. But specifically with regards to reels and stuff for Seychelles specifically, there's a lot of things that are a little different that might not apply for you if you're fishing skiff based in the Keys or something like that. So what I'm going to try and do in this video is run through some basics and things to consider, and sort of talk about pros and cons of a couple different styles of reels. And I won't go too much into big differences between particular brands and stuff right now. It's a pretty exciting time to buy just anything, whether it's fly rods or fly reels. The market, there's so many awesome products out there, a lot of brands that are obviously really, really good. So in the sort of upper level, upper sort of price bracket of reels, you can't really go wrong. Some of them do have their weaknesses, that's for sure. Some can be a little bit more robust than others, but there's a lot of trade-offs and a lot of pros and cons. So what we're going to try and do is just go through a couple basics here and see what we can do. So I think one of the first things we should do is basically talk about the differences between seal drags and cork drags. So we've got a good example here, a nice spread of reels on the table here. Basically, like I said, these are all my personal reels. There's a couple Shiltons, Arbor, a couple Makos as well, and I do have a couple hatches in the back, but we'll use the Makos as an example for seal drags instead of the hatch. So yeah, let's get stuck straight in. So this is the 9500 Mako. It's one of the smaller, I think it's the smallest one in their range, and this is an example of a seal drag reel. These are really, really, really great reels. They obviously look awesome. There's a lot of they're great reels. A couple really nice things about them individually. As a particular reel, the drag knob itself doesn't tighten up as you tighten up. From loose to full lock is sort of basically 360-degree turn, full drag, and then sort of full loosen up again. So that's a really nice thing. And just to show you an example of what we mean about seal drag is if I loosen the spool and take it apart, that little mechanism, this mechanism over here, that's actually the drag. So everything is inside there. It needs a special tool to remove. You know, if you're on the flats and something happens to the drag and you're fishing with a Mako, doesn't happen frequently, but it has happened before, you're in a bit of trouble. There's no plan. You know, if you're on a 2-week back-to-back trip and something happens to your reel, that reel is going to spend the rest of its trip in your backpack, you know. So the one key thing to bear in mind when you're thinking of a seal drag reel is the reel is only as good as its seal. No matter how good the reel is, no matter how well it's constructed, no matter how beautiful or pretty it looks, if the seal inside or the way that they seal the drag is not, you know, at a really high standard, unfortunately the second it lets water in there, it's game over. Obviously, once again, that applies to if you're wading, spending a lot of time on foot, or a lot of time you know, you're on foot, dumping your reel in the water and all kinds of stuff, which I know a lot of people don't do, especially a, you know, $1,600 reel. A lot of guys don't just want to throw them around and things, but that's what they are actually made for, and they do, you know, take a beating pretty well. This one's got lots of boat rash and like the big one. Anyway, so I mean, they are used to being hammered and dealt with, but just bear that in mind. Then the next example we have here is my Ye Old Faithful. This is an SL7 Shilton. This is one of the, this is sort of the 12 weight range. You can fish this on an 11, 12 and plus. They do an SL8, which is a really big one, you know, 14 weight blue water kind of stuff. And just to give you an example, so as you saw with the Mako, to undo it is quite simple. With the Shilton, a little bit more. This one I've pretty loosened. You know, you got this little grub screw here, and you got your drag knob, a little shaft you hold on the side. Undo the drag knob. Once the drag knob comes off, you can take this pin out, and then you can remove your reel. So 2 parts, and now you can understand what we mean by cork drag. So this plate over here, this is your cork drag. I don't know what that was. It's a little clicker anyway. That was from my last service. Anyway, so this is a cork drag reel. So you can see the cork plate over here. This is what stops, you know, puts a lot of pressure onto the reel itself. So basically what happens is, as you tighten the drag knob, it compresses the reel and pushes these 2 parts together. So it pulls the spool towards the drag plate, and the drag plate obviously applies pressure to the back of the spool, and that's what applies the drag. Cork drags are known, they do have their cons as well and their pros. Obviously, cork drags, a couple things that they're really known for, obviously, is that they are extremely simple and extremely robust. You know, some guys coming from fishing with, you know, seal drag reels like Makos, hatches and stuff, sometimes the guys don't like these because you have to crank the drag to tighten it up. But the nice thing about the ability to do that is if your cork has gotten wet or whatever it is for some other reason, which is not quite ideal, but if it has, you do have the ability to put on a lot of pressure, you know. So with some of these reels, when you go max, that's it. If there's a problem inside, you know, if the washers have worn out a bit or whatever, you'll lose a bit of drag pressure over a bit of time. But with a cork drag, you just crank with your hand, and it can really, you know, get the job done. So those are essentially the 2 basics. The biggest advantage with these is these are unbelievably easy to service. You know, once again on my Instagram, I did a video last year about how to service a Shilton. You know, check that out if you're interested in servicing. But essentially, there's not much to these reels. They're very simple. They work really well. It's you know, not a coincidence that a lot of really demanding fisheries use these as their rental reels for guests. You know, from the Seychelles to even now in the Bahamas, you know, we're using the Shiltons for guest reels as well. We've got some seal drag reels as well, some hatch stuff, and also now the Arbor reels. But these guys are 100% the old faithful, and just don't fail. They just get the job done every single time, and are really robust. So I mean, that's essentially the 2 the two types of fly reels you get. You get your seal drag reel and you get your cork drag. Okay, so now that we understand the difference between a seal drag and a cork drag, a couple other things to take into consideration. So personally, it all depends on the type of fishing you're doing. Like I said, this video is going to be very much sort of focused on the sort of saltwater world. All these reels here are sort of saltwater specific. Doesn't mean you can't use them in the freshwater, obviously, but the size and the design and all of that is all sort of focused at fishing in the salt. So a couple of things. I'd say the next big consideration to think about is, and another thing a lot of people talk about, is arbor size. So when we talk about arbor, we're literally talking about the inner diameter of this bottom section here. And essentially it's a sort of ratio between this inside diameter here and this outside diameter. So the inside diameter and the sort of the ratio between the two determines how much braid or how much backing you can load onto these reels. But two, it also determines how much line you can pick up with every wind. So if you're new to fly fishing, these reels are, if you come from a conventional background, these reels are 1-to-1. So every time you turn the handle, the spool only turns once. Another thing that catch a lot of people out is when the line goes the other way, the handle follows suit. So we've seen a lot of knuckle rash on the handles over the years. It's quite funny. Sometimes it sucks a bit, but anyway, it can hurt. But definitely something to remember when you're fishing. But anyway, so these reels are 1-to-1. So every time you turn the handle, that's sort of how it picks up line. There's no gearing or anything in this. So they're very simple mechanisms. So something to consider is the only way you can pick up a lot of line, if you're trying to wind and you need a reel really quickly, the only way you're going to pick up a lot of line is with a very, very large arbor reel. So you can look at the difference here. So for example, this is a SR12, so this is the new 12-weight version from Shilton in comparison to the old 12-weight version of Shilton. And you can see quite clearly here that these two reels, the new one has got a substantially larger arbor. I don't know the whole spec or anything, but they are quite a bit larger in sort of total outside diameter. And what that does is it really, really helps with picking up a lot of line, and two, cranking power. So remember, there is no gearing in here, so if you're trying to wind on a fish, you're going to wind completely directly against the fish or any load that's against there. So no gearing. So arbor picking up line can make a really, really big difference. And in one scenario where that makes a really big difference, in my personal opinion, is fishing for bonefish. I don't know if you guys have ever fished for bones, or if you have or if you haven't, but one thing that bonefish are notorious for doing is they run away from you at a lightning pace, but they don't get very far, and they'll turn around and come straight back at you. So it often really helps to have a reel that you can really pick up line very, very quickly. It saves yourself from having to run backwards to try to keep the line tight and keep the pressure and all the rest of that. Because obviously, as we all know, slack line is the enemy, especially fishing barbless and things like that. So, a nice large arbor fly reel, especially in the 8-weight, 9-weight class, really makes a lot of difference. If that's what you're going to be doing, is focusing on fishing for bones, permit, things like that, really large arbor really does really help, in all honesty. And those are the sort of big things that you need to consider. Is the advantage of a large arbor is very often the ability to wind really well, pick up line very, very quickly, helps a bit with some cranking power, and some large arbor reels, have a little bit less line capacity than smaller arbor reels, but I often find that something that's often overlooked is the width of the reel. So you'll look at the comparison between the Mako here and the Shilton. These are both 9-weight versions. This is the SR9, sort of 9-weight Shilton version. These are, honestly, I think this is one of the greatest reels ever made. It's really beautiful. It does the job. It's my absolute favorite. It's done everything and more. It's really, really awesome. But if you look at the size difference, the Shilton's got a slightly larger arbor than the Mako, for example. But the Mako definitely has width on the Shilton. You can see quite clearly that this reel on the right here is, can definitely hold a lot more backing. And that's got to do with purely the width of the spool, not only the size or the diameter or how narrow the inner arbor is. Obviously, something to consider is you can see the inner diameter on the Shilton here is quite large. There's not they sort of, the design of the spool is really nice and how they get it to pack some really good quality braid. I mean, this, to put in just for your reference, I mean, on this Shilton I have 50-pound Cortland braid, and I think I've got about just over 300 yards, about 320, 330 yards of 50-pound. And then I'm fishing on top of that is Cortland all-purpose taper fly line. Awesome line, personally really like it. But so it still holds a lot of line. So on this Mako, you can clearly see the difference. The multicolored backing on here. This is also 50-pound, but there's a lot more on here. There's about 550 yards of backing on the Mako. But that's purely because the inner diameter is quite a bit smaller. It's quite a bit wider as well, as you can see over here. So it can pack a lot more line onto it. In all honesty, guys, in the lighter stuff like this, I think only, I stand corrected, but I think only if you're fishing really light tippet IGFA record style stuff. I mean, even if you are 350 yards is a long way away. Let's just get something straight here. That's a very, very long way away. Line capacity is important, but I think the ability to load roughly about 300 to 400 yards of high quality backing is the most important thing. It's not about how much you can load. I mean, in all honesty, a lot of the guys, even this last season we had in the Seychelles, we had a few guests that, fished, one particular guest was concentrating really hard on breaking IGFA Indo-Pacific permit records. And in not one of those records he did it very well, and they caught a bunch of awesome fish. But in not one of those was he, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meters into his backing. It really isn't a big deal. On the heavier stuff, 12 weights and things, if you're fishing from the boat, you're fishing for big yellowfin or, sails and things like that, very, very often you have the ability to follow the fish. Obviously, yellowfin, if he decides to go down, you might be in a bit of a problem. But I mean, even by us in the Seychelles, most of the time when we were fishing for yellowfin, even on the edge of the drop, we'd be probably in like 250 meters of water. So if that fish really decides to put his head down, get his tail behind him and disappear, I mean, you're still going to be okay with 400 meters of backing. You don't need 1,000 meters of backing on your. I mean, if you want it, cool, go for it. But that's purely my experience over many years of fishing for awesome fish in various environments, from on foot to on skiffs, whether it's blue water or on the flats, and backing capacity in that sort of 350 meter range is always been sufficient. Even on like this Arbor Super 12 here, narrow arbor in the center, pretty large outside diameter, very similar in size to the SL7, but it's quite a bit smaller than the SR12, which is the new Shilton. And then obviously the Mako, this is the 9600, their bigger one. This is essentially, they call it a 12 plus. So on the spool, they reckon it's either 12 weight or 14 weight. I fish this on my 12. But as you can see, this is a very large arbor reel. You can wind and pick up a lot of fly line and a lot of backing back onto this. On this reel, I've got about 350 meters of 100-pound Cortland, and the same on my SR12. I've got about 350, just under 400, about 350 meters of 100-pound hollow core Cortland. So all those reels, all my personal reels, that's sort of where I'm at with line capacity, and those are sort of considerations to take in when fishing, when looking at different arbor sizes. Majority of brands and reels on the market today, it's all pretty much of a muchness. Most of these reels, most of these reels are all very similar in size, Arbor wise. That's sort of a sort of weight thing to take into consideration as well, but we'll touch base on the weight in a minute. But so for Arbor, if you're fishing for fish like bones and permit and stuff, I think Arbor makes a big difference. Same if you're fishing for tarpon and you've got a really fishing line class for these fish, having a nice big Arbor really helps. Like for me personally, I'd fish this SR12 on my 11 weight for tarpon. Definitely gets the job done. There's more than enough drag pressure on this to stop a very big fish. And I mean, if you're fishing 20 pound or something, or like 30 pound or whatever, the drag in this is definitely going to be overkill. These reels can put a lot of drag, a lot of pressure, but the ability to pick up line, if the fish has run a long way and you're following the fish, or you're trying to pick up line again with the boat, this is going to help you a lot. It will save your arm a lot less winds, and this exactly the same thing can be said about the Mako. This I would fish on my 12, like I said, and this would be also one of my definite go-tos fishing for tarpon. Really nice drag, super smooth, gets the job done. Also a lot of pressure. You can put a lot of pressure on the fish, but because of the size of the Arbor, it really helps pick up line if you need to follow fish. When it comes to GT fishing, guys, I will definitely touch base on that. I mean, it's something I've spent many years doing. When it comes to GT fishing, one of the most important things when it comes to these reels is strength and the drag. So when I say the drag, it needs to be smooth, and you need to be able to put a lot of pressure on these fish. So same thing with regards to Arbor. I also really like large Arbor reels for GT fishing, and that's why you can see the evolution of the Shilton has moved from an SL7, which is the original classic bomb-proof design, to the SR12, which is as strong, if not even stronger. Definitely has more drag pressure than this reel, and is just a beautiful, really well made, awesome reel. So these are definitely, when it comes to GT fishing, if you look at the evolution of these two reels, this is what these reels essentially were made for. If you're ever interested in GT fishing, you definitely cannot go wrong with these. I stand corrected, and I'm sure someone will have something to say about this out there, but I can almost confidently say there have been more GTs landed on fly on this planet with one of these on the other end of a rod than any other reel in existence. Whether it's been on Alphonse, whether it's with Fly Castaway, whether it's the boys from African Waters, this is what the guys were using and have been forever. I know FCA guys have switched to Wade, which are also great, similar principles, really strong, awesome reels. But the moral of the story is that these things just are the bomb. And if you look at the evolution, this is where it started, this is where it's at now. Nice big drag plate, very simple, and also really nice large Arbor. Pick up some line, get line back, the fish turns, comes back at you, and you need to really get some line back, and this sort of does the job. So there are some trade-offs which we'll touch on base on now when it comes to weight, but in all honesty, Arbor, that's sort of a couple things to take into consideration. So pros from large Arbor reel: often you can pick up a lot of line really quickly, and it really helps with cranking power if you need to crank, but most of the time use the rod. But anyway, so that's our talk about Arbor. Okay, so we've spoken about the differences between seal drags, cork drags, and different Arbor sizes and line capacity, and a couple of things. We touched on a couple of bases, and so there's only sort of one or two more things we're gonna sort of cover. I think the next thing that really I need to mention, especially the difference between seal drag and cork drag, is the weight. So for example, this 9 weight from Shilton, this 9500, so SR9 Shilton, 9500 Mako. These, I mean, I should weigh them, but The mass difference between these is quite staggering. This reel is much lighter than what this is. I don't know what the numbers are, but in your hand and at the back end of a fly rod, it's noticeable. So that's something to keep in mind, you know. On the lighter stuff, it's not really such a big deal. It is something to take into consideration if you're buying something for your kid, you know. So for younger people getting involved in the sport, especially, you know, fishing for bones and things like that, you know, which we see a lot of, you know, that's where lighter cork drag reels really stand out, because the whole setup then remains nice and light and much easier for, you know, younger people or smaller people to fish and cast with and things, and enjoy themselves and actually cast well and, you know, have a good time. You know, the heavier stuff can get a little bit cumbersome, can be a little bit hard. Often, you know, if it's not balanced well, you know, super light rod with a very heavy reel, it's not really ideal. You know, it's nice to get a good balance between the blank or the rod you're using, plus the, you know, the reel that's attached to the end of that. And I mean, something to consider. So personally, I fish with I have an old 12 weight. My 12 weight that I fish with is a, you know, G Loomis cross current. It's the old classic. I mean, it's actually so damaged. I mean, I've got an old gimbal cover at the back. I mean, a gimbal cover that I've, you know, replaced the cork that had broken off, and with fiberglass. And I mean, I'll actually show in another video when we talk about the video about rods. I'll use it as an example. But that 12 weight is quite a heavy 12 weight. It is like a broomstick. Matched with this reel, the Mako, is unbelievably hard to spend a day blind casting. So if you're fishing in a place where you need to blind cast all day, I can guarantee you a 9600 Mako on an old classic like a cross current is going to keep you're going to know all about it. You know, the difference between fishing at this reel, the SR12, which is also so much lighter than this 9600, it makes it such a huge difference. You know, you're able to put in a lot more casts with a lot less effort. So I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. Is very often the drag mechanism inside a seal drag reel, even, you know, especially if it's a really powerful seal drag with a whole bunch of different plates stacked and all kinds of things, you know, really often the weight steps up quite a bit. You know, I'm not one of those guys that's all about lighter is better. You know, there is, I think, a benchmark where, you know, mass, these things needs to weigh something until we start seeing, you know, full titanium and carbon fiber fly reels, which I know some guys are making, but until we're seeing that stuff, you know, while we're using aluminium, or aluminum for the Americans, but there's gonna get a stage where, you know, that's kind of it. You know, you can only take so much material off a reel, but if you're expecting it to handle, you know, a lot of drag pressure and handle getting abused and stuff, you know, there is a fine line, and the same with fly rods as well. So, you know, those are some things to really take into consideration. You know, all these things, it's all context relevant. It depends where you're fishing, what you're doing. You know, I think if you're blind casting all day, you know, covering water, you know, mass it's gonna add up. It really is. If you've never thrown a 12 weight before with a very big fly on the end of it and a very big reel and a heavy rod, it's really hard work. It genuinely is. You know, even if you're a, you know, really proficient caster, you know, just the whole scenario, how you're casting, you know, how fast you have to strip, all these things, you know, plays a big role in the physical part of, you know, actually fishing. So, you know, mass really does come into that. I think this sort of size and weight that the guys from Shilton have managed to get out of it is very good. It's a really nice trade-off. You know, a lot of material is missing from these reels, and it still maintains its sort of structural integrity. And you know, especially even under a lot of pressure, you don't see any warp in the reel. You know, we see that happen with a lot of other reels that are very light. As soon as you put immense amount of drag on it, you know, the line goes on the one end of the spool, and you can actually see the spool start sort of waving, just because the guys have removed so much material to try and get the weight as low as possible. So a couple of these other guys, you know, some of the other manufacturers have, you know, sort of drawn a line in the sand and basically said, as far as weight goes, that's where it's at. But even this Mako, you can see it's got it's quite a bit more material on it. Just everywhere. The drag plate is sort of almost 2/3 full. The whole back plate here, similar to the Arbor, full back plate. This Arbor is also really heavy. I know it's the full back one. The new seal drags from Arbor are also really nice. I think the original ones had a bit of problems with the seals, but now I think they're a lot better. Same with the hatches. The new hatch that's out now, I think it's called the Icon, is really good. We had some guys testing it on location a couple months ago, or last year, and they seem to be doing really well. But something to consider. There's often a bit of a weight trade-off between the seal drags like the Mako and the cork drags like the Shilton. Definitely heavier on the seal drag and lighter on the cork drag. So if you're going to be spending a lot of time blind casting, I would seriously consider a lighter setup in its entirety. But if you are staking out only a couple shots, pure sight fishing, very little blind casting, then it doesn't really matter. It's living on the skiff, you're not carrying it everywhere, then it's really, buy what your heart wants, it's one of those things. Guys, so that's pretty much it with regards to the weight. I think the next thing we're going to touch on is obviously price, so price on these things can vary dramatically from a couple $100 up to, I think this guy is close to 2,000 US. So, reels can be very, 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 very expensive. There's a reason why these things are expensive. The machining and the work that goes into making these products is mind-blowing. So there is a justification behind that pricing. I would honestly say, I know a lot of you guys are going to say it's just because we're South African, but you're going to be very hard pressed, very, very hard pressed to find a superior reel to a Shilton for its price. I know I didn't really want to do like a comparison vibe, but I can't talk about price without mentioning that. Here is an SR9 that I don't want to price. I'll put a couple links down below to different websites and see what pricing you guys can get. I don't want to quote anybody or whatever, but these are like the 9-weight. I think it's like sub $600, 700 US, 600 US, 550, depends where you buy them, and if you get them in the States or SA or whatever it is. Whereas in comparison, there's a Mako, which is 9,500, same deal, but this dude costs I think it's like $1,500, $1,600. There's no ways this is twice the reel. It's just not. So the challenge is, it's a beautiful piece of machinery. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely adore these things. Don't get me wrong about that. But if you're price conscious, there are some other products out there like this, but these guys in particular, they just get it right to beat this. The majority of reels that we see, pretty much these are equivalent to $1,000 reels easily. $2,000 reels, like a 9600 Mako. In comparison to the Shilton, there's no ways that this reel is going to last longer than this reel, or this guy is going to let you down before this. It's just not. They're both incredibly well made, really strong, beautiful reels. They're all built by people that fish, and they make sense, but it's hard to beat that price wise. Honestly, really, 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 really hard to beat those price wise. Like I said, there are a lot of other cheaper reels in other manufacturers and brands and stuff, which for sure are great reels. But the quality that comes out of these guys for the price that they're charging, you're going to be very, very, very hard pressed to find a superior product for less money than the Shilton, in all honesty. It's not just because we're South African. They definitely do the job, and they do it really, really, really well. Yeah, so those are a few things to think about, guys, if you're in the market shopping for some reels. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, lots of things to take into consideration. As I said from the beginning, there's awesome, huge market out there. You know, lots of manufacturers, you know, lots of really beautiful reels, you know, intricate designs, you know, really well made stuff. Obviously, I don't have every manufacturer that exists on the planet on my table here. These are, like I said, on my personal reels that I've been fishing with for many, many years. I mean, this SL7, I think I've had this thing for like 6 years, 7 years. I've got another one in the back there that I've had for, I mean, since I've started guiding, which is like 10 years ago. And you know, all these reels have been through the wars, they've seen it all, they've caught a lot of fish. Every single 12-weight reel you've seen here has caught multiple GTs. Every single 9-weight reel you've seen here has caught multiple bonefish. You know, a couple permit, not many, but only. You know, this caught some tarpon and bones, I mean, and GTs and stuff over its lifespan. So yeah, every single reel on the table here has definitely been through its paces. You know, I've worked with them over a long time. And they have never ever let me down. You know, so guys, in all honesty, you know, I don't think you can go wrong. There are obviously the price point can be an issue, but like I said, I think if you can and you can get your hands on a Shilton for the saltwater world, these just you're not going to go wrong, honestly. You know, you look after them. Like I said in the video on Instagram, we talk about a service. I'll leave a link below about servicing the Shilton specifically, but that can be copied over to almost anything. We cover the whole setup, how to do it. When, you know, I'm not going to redo that in here, but you know, a lot of interesting information there. Something to take into consideration if you're looking at one of these reels. But over and above that, I think I think that covers all the bases. You know, talking about all the different types and, you know, things that you can consider. So yeah guys, I'm not sure if there's anything else you guys would like to know. Like I said at the end of all my other videos, is honestly, if there's any questions or anything you guys want to answer specific, that need answered specifically, you know, if you have a specific scenario, if you're going fishing somewhere, you want some information, please don't hesitate, shout down below. Obviously the usual guys, like, subscribe and all the rest of that. And yeah, thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks guys, cheers.